Most SaaS companies don't have a growth problem. They have a prioritization problem. Treating every customer the same might sound fair, but it quietly kills retention, expansion, and focus. Welcome to Breakthrough SaaS Growth with the Jasons, the podcast where we cut through the noise and share strategies that actually drive customer-led growth. Each week, we bring you straight-talking conversations on adoption, retention, expansion, all things AI, and everything in between. Let's get started. Welcome to the latest episode of Breakthrough SaaS Growth with the Jasons, with myself, Jason Noble, here in London, and my partner in crime, Mr. Whitehead. Say hello, Jason.
Hello, Jason.
We are super excited today. We have a guest, Christine Day. Welcome, Christine. Christine's over in Sydney, Australia. It's a public holiday in Australia today, but she's very kindly joining us quite late in her evening as well. So welcome, Christine. For our listeners that don't know, Christine is a growth strategist and founder of Results Today. She spent over 20 years in enterprise software sales and marketing, and her work focuses really on helping business identify their highest value customers and using real data for that, not just making assumptions. She's developed a really incredible practical approach to applying the 80-20 principle at a customer level, and she helps companies focus effort where it drives the strongest commercial return across retention and expansion. So a really, really super topic for what we want to talk about. Welcome, Christine. And you've also published a new book as well. So please tell us all about this and yourself.
Okay. Where do I start? So my background is enterprise software. I actually popped out of uni as a propeller head at Techo. I did a Bachelor of Business and Information Processing and Systems Analysis, but thankfully someone tapped me on the shoulder 4 years into being a systems engineer saying, you should move into sales. So I'm really glad they did. So I've been in enterprise software sales and marketing in the corporate world for decades, but wanted to start up my own business and then moved into creating Results Today. And everyone sort of said, well, I suppose you're going to be a sales consultant, right? And I sort of went, I'm not really keen on sales consultants. I actually am going to learn about marketing. And at that point, digital marketing was about a decade ago. Digital marketing was all very new at this point. So I learnt from the ground up, but I soon became quite familiar with the fact that my background, my knowledge is strategy. You know, I spent time in corporates looking at territories and finding out where there should be a product and what the demand is and how we can resource that product and all that type of thing. So strategy makes sense to me. So I've naturally gravitated to strategy. And that's where I am now as a growth strategist.
And what about your book? Just have a quick
intro.
Oh, yes. Of course. So the book is called 80-20 Growth Strategy. I think you can sort of see it there. It actually evolved after I created the software. So what happened was I had an aha moment, if you like, with a client. I went out to, I met with this client. We'd been working together for over a year. And they came out and said, Christine, we want our monthly review early. And I sort of, that's weird. I normally create the review at the time. And it was like, I don't know, a few days early. And I'm thinking, this is not good news. This is going to be a problem.
As you'd normally do, yeah.
Yes, exactly. When there's something out of the ordinary, you're thinking it's not good. Anyway, so here I am sitting in the boardroom waiting for the news to come. It didn't come. Waited to the very end of the meeting. And they started with, so we've lost our largest client. I went, oh, that's not good news. It's not disastrous, but it's not great. Mm-hmm. And they proceeded to say, okay, so we've decided that we don't want high net worth individuals anymore. I'm going, okay, I've just built this whole strategy around high net worth individuals. We've been working it for a year and now all of a sudden you don't want it. And it was a real aha moment for me because they started to describe their value. So they started to say, well, they're a little bit fickle. They don't refer. They might have a large amount of revenue up front, but that's it. They're very high demand, high resourced. And this is the definition of value. And I'm listening and I'm going, Okay, so I've tried my entire career in marketing to be data driven. Everything I do is data driven. I talk to the clients, find out everything that we need, find out the ideal customer profile, how they buy, the decision-making criteria they use. The whole bit, the entire strategy is what I like to call data driven because it comes from the single source of truth, the client, except for one thing, the ideal customer profile. I asked the client. So I'm thinking, I need to find a way to make the ideal customer profile data driven and not just take an opinion. Now, granted, it's an opinion that is formed over years of experience and knowledge, but that example tells you that it's fickle in itself. Sure. It's an opinion. It's an assumption. It's not based on data. And my whole premise is data. So that sort of got me thinking, how can I create an ideal customer profile through data? And I've always known about the 80-20 principle, and I've worked it quite a lot. And it's funny, I was just talking to a colleague and he said, you need to read this book. 10x is easier than 2x because it's everything you're talking about. And so I've been talking about high value clients and the 20% the whole time. And then I just started to think, well, how do we actually turn that into metrics? So it's then a matter of saying, we live and breathe SaaS. All they do is live and breathe metrics. So, what are the metrics that are then going to identify our high value clients? And that's how the whole process started. And I then came up with the whole methodology and I created workshops around it. And then I started to think, that's a lot of big data. It's like, this is hard work. I really need to develop a software product to do that. So I sat down and developed a software product because theoretically my background, it was a long time ago, is programming. So I then wrote the software. And then once I wrote the software and got that going, I went, well, it's a very different strategy. It's a very different concept. People don't get it. They all say, so what did your software do? Is it like Trello? Is it like this? It's not like anything. So I really need to explain it in a lot of detail. And the only way I can do that is to write a book. So awesome. There you go.
I mean, it is the 80-20 principle. A lot of people think they understand it. A lot of organizations understand it. But why do you think that most SaaS companies are still not using it to make real decisions? What's the gap there?
I actually think there's 3 reasons that people don't use it. The most important one, and the really obvious one, is whenever you hear about the concept, it's a concept. It's a principle, a theory. There's 20% that give you 80%, but how do you find the 20%? What's the process? And the 20% is different for everybody. But if you just assume, let's say that your best clients are the ones with the best revenue, that's a very narrow way of looking at things. And so I went about looking at, a very complicated way to create the criteria. So that's the first thing, which is I think it's a theory. So a lot of people don't know how to put it into practice. And then the second thing is, if they did put it into practice, how are they going to get the rest of the organization to come on board? What about the salespeople? How are you going to get salespeople to follow it? It's really complicated. And the third is, what about the 80%? No one tells you what to do with the 80%. They all say, off you go, get 20% and focus on them and everything's going to be wonderful. But what about the 80? It's great if you've got a business that is a one-off. They sell to one-off companies, but I don't know any SaaS company that does that. We're all on a reoccurring revenue, and we have clients that we want to keep forever. And so it's tough. So yeah, I try and tackle each of those 3 points in my book. But yeah, I think they're the main 3 reasons that people don't actually implement the 80-20 principle.
I think it's one of the key things as well. I mean, you can't forget about the 80%, because if you forget about the 80%, that 20% suddenly becomes a lot bigger. And it is. So they're great, those. I think they're really important to remember. What do you think what's the cost today to a SaaS business when they spread effort evenly across their customer base? If they don't look at prioritization, what's the impact for the customers of the organization?
Yeah, it's more about the opportunity cost, I think, of not focusing on the 20 and of diluting your efforts evenly across the business when all clients are actually not even. The whole principle says that 20% of your clients are giving you 80% of your value. So that means that when you're spending 80% of your time, which you are, on the people that are giving you 20% of your return, that's an opportunity cost. You're wasting your time. Whereas if you spent that 80% of your time getting more of the 20% and focusing your efforts on the 20% and giving them the service they deserve, you'll be getting even more exponential return. So you'll get and that's where the whole exponential growth with less effort comes from. It's by leveraging that.
Sure. I see a lot when I'm working with customer success teams, that same thing, like they don't know how to say no to a customer. So they spend all their time giving the same service to everyone. And the opportunity cost is just huge. It's like you're missing where you can create the most value. I'm curious though, in your experience, if you're to a CRO, where do they start? How do they get started implementing this and really saying how do I identify my high value customers using data? Because you mentioned that so often. What's the first step or first couple of steps?
Yeah. So this is where it sort of becomes like a bit of a disruptive process. The first step is actually to look at your business goals. What is the business's North Star? Mm-hmm. So if the business's North Star is market dominance, then create criteria around that. So let's say it's market dominance, then, you've got high ARR, you've got profitability. Well, maybe you don't have profitability, actually. You might just want market dominance of, high average annual recurring revenue. But, and this is the point, every business is different. So you get your business goals, you identify the criteria that link into those business goals. And those criteria are typically industry standard metrics, the ones that we all know, the ones that SaaS companies use every single day. The only problem is they use it at a company level. So they don't put annual recurring revenue down to the client level. They don't put customer lifetime value down to the client level. They look at it from the company level. But if you actually look at it at a client level, then all of a sudden you can rank your clients and you can see who's in the top 20%. And that's how you can identify them. But more importantly, once you've got that criteria, you then actually make it public to all the organisation. They understand what the criteria is. So sales have the same criteria, customer service has the same criteria, finance has the same criteria. So we're all singing out of the same hymn book. And all the decisions are now objective. They're not subjective. You're not looking at judgment calls anymore, which is really important when you're going into economic time or times of economic uncertainty, which is what's happening right now. Having an objective way to measure and to have decisions, how to form decisions, and for everyone to know what's going on is super important.
Yeah, no, I think that's huge. We had a guest on, Christy Falteroso, a little while ago. One of the things she said was, when she stopped saying meetings, I think, or I feel, and started saying the data suggests, the collaboration rate went through the roof. So I think that's really important.
It changes that engagement for everybody. It's not a subjective thing. It's not something that you're thinking about. I mean, even quite often, a lot of our gut feelings are based on experience. So there is an argument that says actually our gut is based on data as well. But when you can present the facts, I think it's really key. What do you find from the organizations that you've engaged with and you're working with? Do they find this a big change? Do they find it difficult to implement? And I guess what are the kind of things that they should stop doing that they might have been doing before if they're looking at how do they improve retention and growth?
Yeah. So surprising is typically what most people think, because when you start looking at what the business's North Star is and then turn those into criteria, it's not necessarily the way you've been working with clients. Most organizations think of a client and they think of the loudest client, or, the one that is the best logo, or that might not necessarily be the one that comes out. The one that comes out as the top 20% once they go through the entire criteria. So it's surprising is probably the first thing I would say. And what do they stop doing? They stop looking at your typical dashboard. So your typical dashboard in a SaaS organization might have the types of criteria that we're talking about, but because they've got it at the company level, everything's averaged out. Yeah. So you can't actually see that the 20% are having so much of a difference, and which is a bit of a risk, because what happens if one of them goes, or the impact that could possibly happen because you've got such a concentration in a small number of clients. So I think that's probably the first thing they stop doing is averaging everything. But also they look at, because they can make decisions objectively, decisions change and collaboration changes within the organisation. So the way with which things get done, and it's not just, a very quick thing. It happens over time. But I think people appreciate it a whole heap more too, because I think you guys spoke a little bit about this. I was listening to one of your podcasts around the new era of SaaS and how people, how organizations can sort of hit a growth plateau, if you like, where things are hard.
Right.
So growth becomes hard. And I think that's when you start looking at this, because growth no longer needs to be hard. If you are looking at ways with which you can make decisions more easily, you can interact with your clients far more objectively, growth doesn't become hard, because you can make the tough decisions. And to your point, Jason, people don't like saying no to clients. They don't like saying, I don't want to deal with you. But now we've got a process in place about how to deal with those clients. Now we're singing out of the same hymn book. It's not about, I personally don't want to talk to you because you drive me crazy. It's about we've got a way with which we're dealing with clients, and if you like, it's a policy and a procedure that's come down from the top down.
Do you find the implementation of the new processes, this new way of working, is that easy? Is it a difficult thing to do? Because I think there is resistance to change. If a business has been working fairly successfully for a long while, individuals are used to that way of working. When you're building these new systems and ways of working, having something implemented from the top down, you do get resistance. But do you find that the approaches you've taken so far with customers, is the implementation fairly straightforward, or have they run into different challenges around it?
So that's where the 80% comes into play. So it's really easy to deal with clients that love you. So typically the 20% value the business more than the 80%, and everyone loves dealing with them. So, I mean, that's not hard. Mm-hmm. What is hard is what to do with the 80%. And that's there's typically three options that I talk about in the book. One is the obvious one: focus on the 20% and put sales and marketing focus on the 20%, and the returns you get are going to be amazing. But then what do you do with the 80%? So so one's net new and one's obviously existing clients. So net new is obvious, it's clear, just don't bother looking at anything else except the 20%. And that's the essence of the growth strategy. It's a very laser focused strategy, focusing on that 20%. So the first thing, if you read 10X is easier than 2X, or you read Perry Marshall's book. So there's a lot of books on 80-20, and they also just get rid of the 80%. They don't tell you how, they don't tell you why.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of ways. First of all, I think we spoke about the fact that if you don't deal with them very often, it's easier. But then there's the subtle way of saying, well, it's costing me more money. So you literally are pricing, making things a little bit more difficult for them, whether it's a product price or a service price or a delivery cost or a servicing cost, whatever it might be. It eventually sorts of erodes away. The other option is to create a separate business unit or a separate team or a separate business. So you might have the A team and the B team, or you might have a completely separate business unit, or you might create a different logo and have them quite separate. And the reason you would do that is all these other books that are talking about the 80-20 rule basically say that you can't service both of them at the same time and be successful, that the 80% will drain your focus.
Right. As I'm listening to you, I'm just reminding of a conversation I had years ago with my brother, and he's a sales guy. And 2 or 3 times now with his different companies, he's had his territory cut. And every time they cut his territory, there was a little bit of panic, a little bit, I'm going to lose my customer base, I'm not going to hit my stuff. And every single time his commissions went through the roof because he was able to focus more on the ones that mattered. So I think I can see where some salespeople would be concerned about having to cut out some customers that they think are easy money for them. It could be a bit of a challenge there. What do you say to those that might worry about it?
Sales actually is the easiest because we involve them very much in the whole process. My background's sales, so it's really easy for me to get them involved. So marketing does a fair bit of heavy lifting in that we spend a lot of time with the 20%. We identify the buyer personas out of the 20%. So there's no ideal customer profile anymore. So we don't have to guess because they're all buyer personas at this point. And we see, what's common through the whole 20%, and we create buyer personas, get to know them intimately. They love talking to us because they value us just as much, nearly as much as we value them, and they want their voice to be heard. So we get to know them really, really well. We get to know their buying process, their objection handling, their pain points. And we bring sales into a workshop scenario where we ask them, what are the pain and objection questions that you often get. So let's talk about the content that we're going to create to answer all the pain and objection questions. So they're involved in this whole process the whole way through. And so they know that when they reach out to this cohort, that they're going to get a better response. They actually want to be spoken to. They're going to have less objections. The differentiators are going to make sense to this cohort. They typically have a shorter sales cycle. So they actually enjoy it more so. And they're also in it together. So when your territory changes, it's a competitive sort of thing against the other salesperson. I know I've been there, done that. It's not fun. But when we're all in it together, it's a different conversation.
I think the great thing here as well, we've talked for years about the ideal of making sure we're selling to the right customers that will get value from our product. And you've gone through challenges and evolutions where organizations haven't sold to the right customers, and that's caused problems further down the line, be it retention, be it support. What this does is completely flips it and really adds to that whole way of working that, look, let's focus. That 20% is your ideal customer base. Let's focus on those. And if you can get that right, there's going to be a transition where the 80% we're not going to service the same. We're not going to worry about them. And as I said earlier, that 80% over time will reduce. And ultimately, all your customer base becomes your ideal customers. So this is a great approach to getting organizations to think more about it. And as you said, as a whole business, not just as a sales team, but as a whole business, we all need to focus on the right customers.
Exactly. Yeah.
How long does it typically take to make this transition? And if you're the CEO, what expectations do you need to set with your board, your investors, or if you're publicly traded, with people at large, like, we're going to go on this adventure and it's going to take this long, and here's why we're going to be better off at the end?
There's no fixed time. It absolutely varies depending on the organisation, their commitment to it, the number of clients they have. It really does vary. But it's also a matter of what they're going to do with the 80% and what decisions they're going to make internally. So every organisation is going to have a different set of criteria. They're going to have a different way with which they go to market and a different way with which they're going to take it on board. So there's no fixed,
Are there common challenges that people should expect, and what advice do you give people about how to get ahead of that or to manage through it?
Yeah. So typically I recommend that an organisation needs to hit the value inflection point before they actually start this. So I call it the value inflection point, but it's basically an organisation needs to have enough experience and has gone through the whole early phases, the startup phase, dealt with lots of customers, understood processes, created an environment that they can see customers that do actually work well with them and customers that don't, so that they can experience the pain, if you like.
Sure.
Yeah. And when we think about it, there's a whole new concept. Most people actually never identify the high value client, so they can go on like this forever.
Right.
But there's definitely a starting point. And the starting point is what would most people would call scale up mode. You're out of startup and into scale up. But if you're not too far into that, then you won't have too many processes that are embedded. So it's about how many processes you have embedded, according to going back to your question as to what the issues are. So if you get there sort of early in the scale up mode and not everything is bedded down, you've got us to a point where, and typically you'll notice that people will be in burnout, or you'll be employing a lot of people that you may or may not have to, all the things that you guys were talking about in that episode, where, how do you know when growth becomes hard? It's no longer fun. That's the value inflection point. And if you catch it early, then there won't be too many, it'll be easier, if you like, to say, what are we going to do with the 80%? How are we going to manage the 20%? How are we going to get this moving? Rather than if the business is a very mature business, it's got some people that are very focused on a particular process, love the 80%, will never get rid of them, then it's much harder. But a lot of it's personality.
Are there any of the customers that you deal with, do they stay with this approach, or are there any that you've seen reverting back to their old ways of working? So does this approach always stick, or are some organizations finding it really challenging to work this way?
Yeah, and it varies. So it's interesting, what's his name? Perry Matthews talks about the fact that once you do focus on the 20%, there's another 20% in the 20%, and there's another 20% in the 20%, and he calls it fractal. And so it's sometimes difficult to know unless it depends on whether you make a very specific decision on the 80%. If you don't, then, and they sort of filter off gradually, you don't actually know if you're getting going through the 20% of the 20% of the 20% and still getting more efficient, or whether you've just said, I'm just giving it a miss. But yeah, a lot of people get into the specifics of it, where you actually become more and more efficient. If that makes sense.
It does completely. Yeah. Christine, this has been such a great conversation, and I think it's something that every listener can see an application of how this applies to their business, to their company, but also to individuals, how you work this way. We always like to leave our guests with our breakthrough challenge question, and the one for you, Christine, today is, if you were brought into an organization as the CRO tomorrow, what's the first decision you would make based on all of this about your customer base that most leaders avoid? So what's that one decision you'd make that lots of people avoid doing?
I would have to say it would be creating criteria from your business goals. I think that is the absolutely most important thing, and making sure those criteria are industry standard metrics that everyone can understand and get on board with, because it's really easy to create objective criteria. I mean, you're going back to assumptions and going back to opinions. But if they're industry standard metrics that everyone understands and jumps on board with, then you can roll it out to the business and you've got an objective way of moving forward.
I love it. Phenomenal conversation. This isn't about treating customers badly. This is about treating them differently depending on the value they create and the value they can achieve. Growth doesn't come from doing more for everyone. It comes from doing the right things for the right customers. Phenomenal conversation, Christine. Before we go, let our listeners know how they can get in touch with you and about what you guys are doing.
Sure. So just contact Results Today. That's my organisation. More than happy to have a chat to anybody around this, whether you want to utilise the software or read the book and then have the organisation come on board and actually go through the growth strategy, the 80-20 growth strategy process. Either. There's a lot of options there.
Great. And what's your website? We'll obviously put in the show notes, but just if you could tell our listeners too.
Resultstoday.com.au, because I'm in Australia.
Christine, thanks so much. Phenomenal conversation.
Thank you. It was great to be on here. Thank you so much. Great chatting to you guys.
Thanks for listening to Breakthrough SaaS Growth with the Jasons. If you enjoyed the episode, follow our show and please share it with someone else in SaaS. You can connect with us on LinkedIn, YouTube, or at breakthroughsaasgrowth.com. And if you know a brilliant guest or a sponsor who'd be a strong fit for the audience, send them our way. Until next time, keep closing the gap between what gets sold and what customers actually achieve.